Distinguished delegates, fellow advocates and experts, and everybody watching around the world. Good day to all of you. I am delivering this message from the Philippines, which earlier this month experienced one of the strongest typhoons on record, Typhoon Goni. Nearly 7 years to the day of the impact of another super typhoon, Haiyan, which warned the world of the consequences of inaction on the climate crisis. The year 2015 saw the formulation of the Paris Agreement, which is celebrated as a milestone as the world has seemingly found the path towards addressing the climate crisis, which is undeniably the gravest threat to anthropogenic and natural systems in the present and the future. There was finally unanimous recognition among all countries that global warming is primarily driven by excessive human-induced emissions of greenhouse gases, and thus must be addressed by drastically reducing global warming pollution and enhancing adaptive strategies towards sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been 5 years since this landmark moment in our history. While progress has been achieved in certain aspects, including the formulation of the Paris Agreement Work Program, the same challenges that have hampered the progress from the previous 25 global negotiations still remain and threaten to undermine decisive climate action. The divide between developed countries that are historically the highest emitters of greenhouse gases and developing countries, most of whom are highly vulnerable to climate change impacts on issues, still remain as wide as ever, especially pertaining to issues about climate finance and loss and damage, both of which must be urgently addressed. The familiar rhetoric is on the brink of becoming tokenistic. This reality is reflected in the nationally determined contributions, which all parties must update and submit by the end of this year. Unfortunately, the current pledges for climate change mitigation under the latest NDC submissions are nowhere near enough to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2030, instead resulting in a 2.9 to 3.4 degree warmer world, where minimizing or reversing climate change impacts would be improbable. Even the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is projected to result in a 6% drop in this year's greenhouse gas emissions, is not enough, because to achieve a 1.5 degree warmer world, we need to achieve a 7.6% reduction in annual greenhouse gas emissions. This is as clear of a sign as any that the NDCs must not only be submitted by the end of this year, but also reflect higher commitments in reducing global warming pollution and enhancing adaptive capacities across all countries. As of early November, only 12 countries have submitted new targets in their respective NDCs. Several countries have already expressed their intention to not update their targets, including the United States, Russia, and Japan, 3 of the 5 highest current emitters of global warming pollution. This is in contrast to the requirement for succeeding NDCs of all parties to have higher ambition, one of the core elements for the successful realization of the goals of the Paris Agreement. Furthermore, the impacts of the ongoing pandemic are causing nations to reevaluate their national development strategies and slow down the finalization of their NDCs. The goals of the Paris Agreement are improbable to achieve without the proper, decisive commitment of countries, especially the high-emitting parties. A lack of updated NDCs is a reflection that these countries do not take this crisis with the required urgency or seriousness, especially with less than a decade to go to limit global warming. For highly vulnerable countries and communities, this also signifies more extreme climate change impacts. And which would result in more economic, social, and environmental loss and damage that worsens poverty, widens inequalities, and hinders national development. The roadmap to a 1.5-degree warmer world has already been clearly established by the best available science. Countries must urgently enhance their commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their respective NDCs, aligned with the IPCC Special Report on 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. A global state of net zero emissions must be achieved by the year 2050, with renewable energy supplying around 1/2 to 2/3 of the world's energy needs and up to 97% global electricity demand. Fossil fuels must be phased down, with coal virtually being phased out. Aside from higher ambition, other principles related to climate action that have been established under the UNFCCC and other frameworks and agreements during the past few decades must be upheld, especially the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Developed countries must commit to drastic emissions reductions and providing adequate financial and technological aid to vulnerable states through clearly established flows and mechanisms, including the $100 billion every year commitment that could help them minimize, if not avert loss and damage. Developing countries must pursue low emissions development strategies and also enhance their adaptive capacities, but partly with support from developed countries. Enhanced NDCs must also be characterized and communicated with transparency in accordance with the guidelines of the Paris Rulebook. All climate change mitigation and adaptation options to be included in enhanced NDCs, from renewable energy development to enhancing natural carbon sinks to adopting climate-smart agricultural practices and sustainable transport, must be implemented in a way that upholds social and climate justice, especially for the sake of those who are most vulnerable. Any proposed solution that results in the degradation of planetary and human well-being while benefiting those with vested interests through accumulation of even more financial or political capital is nothing more than a false solution. In addition, the linkages between emissions reductions measures and cross-cutting issues with implications on enhancing adaptation, such as poverty alleviation, gender equality, health, climate change education, and youth development, must be clearly presented in the finalized NDCs. This would strengthen the engagement of non-government stakeholders and improve the formulation, implementation, and monitoring of identified mitigation and adaptation options and other long-term strategies aligned with current national plans for low-carbon, resilient, and inclusive development. An important avenue for enhancing NDC commitments is scaling up nature-based solutions, which are more cost-effective in the long run than corresponding engineered solutions. Among these actions include enhancing natural carbon sinks, such as forests and blue carbon, which is just as important to achieving a net zero emissions world by 2050 or even sooner as initiating a just transition to a renewable energy powered world. Their co-benefits on biodiversity conservation, food security, increased resilience to natural hazards, and livelihoods for local communities are especially crucial for the sustainable development of vulnerable countries. Currently, at least 66% of current pledges include nature-based solutions as part of their mitigation and/or adaptation goals, although only a few of these come from high-income nations. Furthermore, many of these commitments lack robust, quantifiable targets and lack synergies between mitigation and adaptation measures. Engineered solutions also continue to receive far more funding than nature-based solutions, a reality that must be changed on the road to a 1.5-degree warmer world. Climate action has already been delayed for decades, deaths due to misinformation propagated by fossil fuel interests, hesitation of governments for decisive action, and unwillingness of stakeholders to initiate the societal transformation necessary to avoid catastrophic climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic must not be used as an excuse by governments to delay the submission of their NDCs. Rather, it should serve as a reminder that everything is interconnected, that attacks on the environment are attacks against humankind, and that it provides an opportunity not just for green recovery, but also laying the foundation towards low carbon development and increased climate resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, the remainder of the year 2020 presents a moment of truth for humankind and the Paris Agreement. The crisis of the earth and the poor have never been louder. The voices of millions of people around the world keep growing stronger and stronger. The question is, will our governments choose to ignore these cries and calls and choose to favor the interests of those who embody the unsustainable concept of infinite growth on a finite planet? Or will they finally have the courage and willingness to listen and begin the inevitable paradigm shift? On behalf of my fellow youth of today, I express my hope that decision makers remember exactly what is at stake for the rest of this decade, for our collective futures. No amount of wealth or power can ever withstand the wrath of nature, especially when its balance and harmony has been disrupted for centuries. We were fools to believe that we can make the environment adapt to us, when the reality is, the planet keeps on turning even when our world stops moving. We have all the tools and resources needed to address the climate emergency. As long as there is time left, as long as there is passion and compassion within our hearts and minds, let us strive to save our world, not as we know it, but for what it could be, for what we hope it can be, so that we can change it for the better. Ladies and gentlemen, an eternal summer is coming. If you think our current new normal would lead us to a happier ending, we will definitely pay more than just our attention. When it comes to the truth, let us not deny, but rather recognize and act upon it. Thank you.